Our topic is fate, and we have prepared very difficult questions for you. If you're ready, let's begin. Okay, let's begin. Is marriage fated? Will the person I'm going to marry come and find me even if I never left the house? Does the God know whether I will end up in heaven or hell? Of course he does. Then why should I put in any effort? No matter what I do, I will not be able to change the outcome. A person cannot choose the time and place he was born or his parents. A person becomes an atheist, deist, or Christian according to these factors. Why does he end up in hell then? Welcome to the cross-examination. Our topic is fate, and we have prepared very difficult questions for you. If you're ready, let's begin. Okay, let's begin. What is fate?
It is that the God encompasses the past, future, and current time simultaneously and knows all events that will take place. At the same time, the fate is the fact that actions of a person are known beforehand and then played out in his or her life, which means that God creates these actions and then they're played out by the person.
Does the God know whether I will end up in heaven or hell?
Of course he does.
Then why should I put in any effort? No matter what I do, I'll not be able to change the outcome.
We think that if God knows something, then we are forced to do it, as if we do things because God knows it. For example, if you're sitting on the top of a mountain and you saw two trains rushing towards each other from opposite sides of the mountain, and then you took a pen and paper and wrote, "These two trains will crash in about 23 seconds at this point," and this really did happen. Those two trains crashed. Could the people in those trains say, "Why did you write such a thing? We were forced to crash because you wrote it?" Of course not. This would be illogical. Why? They didn't crash because you wrote it. You wrote it because they were going to crash. Just like this, God knows what has happened, what is happening, and what will happen in the future simultaneously, and He has written this as fate. Just like those two trains didn't crash because you wrote it down, you're not forced into doing anything because God wrote it. God wrote it because He knew you were going to do so.
What do you mean by saying Allah solely knows things? Does He not interfere at all? What about earthquakes or other natural phenomena? Am I the one who causes these?
Of course, I don't mean that. God does not create anything that we did not will. That's not what this means. There's no problem with God knowing what we are going to choose before we decide to make the choice. No one is forcing you to make that choice. That is what I meant. Other than that, if we get ill, of course, this is from God. We are not responsible for events that happen outside of our control. Why was there an earthquake? You will not be responsible for this because such things occur as a part of God's will. You don't have control over these. But you do give a reaction to things that happen to you, so you are responsible for this. Let's say there was an earthquake and your house collapsed. If you say, "Why did the God do this to me?" then this is a reaction that you choose, and you will be responsible for this. So there is no problem in God's decreeing such things for you, but the reactions you give will determine what your profile will be like, and you will be held responsible for these.
Is the person I will marry predetermined? Will I determine who this person will be? Or will the God determine it? Is marriage fated? Would the person I'm going to marry come and find me even if I never left the house?
Marriage may be predetermined by God's infinite will or by an individual's partial will, but because there's no way of us knowing this, we must strive to gain a result. For example, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, gives advice about what to look for in a spouse. A person is married for 4 things: wealth, beauty, nobility, and religion. So you should marry the religious and prosper. This is a well-known hadith. We understand that we're not supposed to sit around and wait for the person whom we are going to marry. Of course, we're supposed to look for that person and consider their qualities. We should show some effort there. Sometimes God may reject the will of His subject. You meet a person and intend to marry them, and they do too, but if God does not want this match, He may reject your wish to get married, or maybe not. Looking at this, we cannot say, "I should just stay put, that person will come and find me." We definitely cannot say this because if we are given tactical advice about how to get married, then we have to be involved in the process. But this marriage still may not occur even though you want it to, and this is determined by God's will. Somewhat like offering a prayer and hoping it is granted.
A person cannot choose the place and time he was born or his parents. A person becomes an atheist, deist, or Christian according to these factors. Why does he end up in hell then?
Now, the person who asks this question accepts place of birth as the cause of an absolute result. Actually, I will complicate the question even further. Is a person who was born in the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, luckier than a person who was born 1400 years later and has never seen the Prophet, peace be upon him? If we look at it from this perspective, we should say that a person who lived in the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, is luckier, but but there are people who lived side by side with him and became unbelievers and even went so far as to fight against him. If a person's place of birth determines whether he will die as a believer or non-believer, then everyone who was born in the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, would go to heaven, and those who weren't would have had to go to hell, as they were born in another time. But this is not the case. We can even state the opposite. The Pharaoh would say, "I am a god, but a prophet was raised in his household." What does it mean to be a prophet? A person closest to God grew up in their midst, and prophets have willpower too. In a place where everyone calls the Pharaoh as the god, or where there are various gods that are worshipped, being a prophet seems like a difficult task. Am I right? The odds are against him. Everything is against him. If you're born in such an environment, it's only logical that you'd worship them too. Otherwise, you would have been born in some other form. This shows us that the place of birth is not a factor in determining if one believes or not. Let's talk about the concept of interim. What is this? A person is born and not told about Islam, meaning that they were not given the message of the God's prophet. Our prophet's, peace be upon him, message did not reach him. If this person dies in this state, God will not directly put him in hell. Hence, there is no problem or harm here either. But, like I said, it is illogical to say a person's place of birth determines his end. If he is born here, he will die as a Muslim or an atheist.
So, are people mere puppets? Do they only play out their roles?
Even the person who asks this question knows that he has a will. In all consciousness, everyone knows that we possess willpower. How can we say we're puppets? What is meant by being a puppet? If puppets have no willpower, they can be manipulated. Okay, but I know that I make my own choices. For example, I chose whether or not to sit here, and you choose whether or not to sit there. I choose whether to talk or not. I choose what I eat. I choose what I wear. And if it's clear that I do have willpower, it seems that saying, "Are we puppets? Are we just playing out our roles?" is mere escapism. Of course, there are some issues that Allah determines, and we've talked about these, but you also make choices with your free will. So we can't say that we are puppets.
Our hour of death is determined. There's a verse about this too. For example, let's say a man has a gun in his hand and he shoots someone with it, and that person dies. Even if the man didn't shoot that person, his death was determined and he was still going to die on that day. Then why is the person we call a murderer guilty?
Firstly, there are some faulty pieces of information in the story. I need to clarify them first. One of them is, someone that was shot dead today was still going to die no matter what. We can't say this, because God creates the cause and effect together, meaning that God creates the effect because there is a cause. But if you remove the cause, which is the shooting, then you can't say whether the person would die or not because there is no evident cause. God may take a person's life or let him live, and that's why we say that we cannot know. Only after the event has unfolded and that person is shot dead do we say, God has decreed his death to be so, but if he wasn't shot, would he have died or lived? What would the decree be? Of course, we cannot know this. So it is wrong to say that it's 100% guaranteed that the person was going to die on that day and that would not change no matter what anybody did. If this wasn't so, would that person live or die? We cannot know this. Because we cannot know this, we cannot say, he's not a murderer, the person was going to die anyway, because that man used his willpower, and he will definitely be held responsible for this.
In the beginning, you said that the fate was God's knowing. God's knowledge does not change. We know this. Okay, well, there's a hadith that says, charity lengthens one's lifespan. What about that? If our hour of death is determined by God, how can giving to charity lengthen one's lifespan?
First of all, I didn't say that the fate is only God's knowing. That's another issue, but I understand what you're saying. There are two kinds of fate. One is the clear record, and the other is the clear book. What do I mean by this? There is a non-changeable fate and a changeable fate. Changeable fate is like God's erasable board. So he can write, I'm going to send this calamity on this day. This is changeable fate. Let's say you gave to charity. Then you can dismiss that calamity. The calamity is erased, and a new fate is written without it. But there also is the preserved slate, which is an even deeper concept. What will or will not happen to you is fated, meaning that it was already written that this calamity would not happen, but it was going to happen according to your changeable fate. You gave to charity, and God erased the calamity that was going to happen. But again, the way everything unfolded was already written on the preserved slate or in the clear book. What you're talking about is the clear record. So, because God even knows whether or not you're going to give to charity, your lifespan is noted in the preserved slate accordingly, and it is unchangeable. But the issue of lengthening your lifespan was written in your changeable fate. Let's say you were going to die on a certain day, but you gave to charity. Your lifespan lengthened. But when you will die is still written on the preserved slate. And there is also a point made by Badi'uzzaman Said Nursi. Lengthening a lifespan may mean that giving to charity results in a life of abundance. This is what it points to.
These are all our questions for now. We will have more difficult questions for you in the next episode.
Okay, I have always said this, and I'll say it again. You can ask me anything. I trust the Quran, not myself.